Hey, what's going on, guys? Phil here with podcast number 197. Today's guest is Alex Garden, the technical designer for Mechwarrior 5 Mercenaries. I'd like to say welcome, Alex, for doing this. First off, it's Saturday for those that don't know, May 2nd. So not only is he taking the time out of his day, he's also taking the time out of the weekend, which is it the weekend anymore? Does that even count? I don't even know. But how are you doing, Alex?
I'm doing good. I'm definitely feeling that same every day is the same as every other day. Time has become meaningless. But,
right?
Yeah, I'm good.
Is that weird for you going from like an industry where, like, I guess a lot of people would say you have flexibility too because you could work from home, I guess, but like you guys are always in the office. So how's this whole transition been for you from going from, I guess, the office life to home office life?
Yeah, I mean, I think for most of us, the transition's been okay. Like as you mentioned, we have the benefits and the fortune to be able to work in an industry that makes this easier to handle than some others. So, we're all still happy that we're working, but we can still keep working pretty much at the same level that we do in the office. Things are obviously a little harder to talk through over chat than just being able to go over to somebody's desk and hammer it out. And we're all remoting into our workstations, which makes things a little slower. But I think generally we're doing pretty good. We do bi-weekly company-wide Zoom meetings as well, just to kind of socialize a bit and with each other. So it's been going okay. It's definitely odd. It definitely was an adjustment period, and I think we're all still like adjusting day to day. But it's been okay.
Well, yeah, I mean, you guys obviously been up in Vancouver, and the only time I've really been in cities most recently, other than where we live near one, but really we don't go there very often. But Vancouver, I mean, everybody's pretty much on top of each other. I mean, you've got buildings, it's a different lifestyle from what I live like, and then plus what you guys are going through out there in all cities and stuff throughout the world right now. Yeah, but yeah, I'm glad you guys are still obviously. I know when you guys. A little bit off topic. And speaking of topics, again, we're going to be talking about modding today. That's why we have Alex here. And but you guys announced the DLC and, obviously delays and this and that. And I was like, with the current world and where I was at, it was expected too, just because you guys, I know remote connections aren't the fastest either. And I can't imagine working on Unreal with maybe, I don't know how that would work. But anyways, let's go ahead and dive into the topic for today. First off, you're the technical designer. What does that mean exactly for, maybe Joe Schmo out there that doesn't know what does that entail for your job at PGI?
Yeah, so I'm a technical designer, not the
okay, gotcha.
Team. But it's actually kind of a recent change. I think you already know this, but I was producer on the project.
Okay.
For most of its dev cycle. But I've had a familiarity with the engine before joining the project, so I had already been working in UE4 and had some understanding of some of the systems. And it was a new engine for the company when we started Mech 5. Obviously, we'd worked in CryEngine for Mechwarrior Online. So I brought some stuff to the table which was useful, especially early on in the project. And then as things kind of developed and we got closer to release, I would occasionally just look for, spots that we didn't have maybe full attention on, or, a little bit of development or prototyping some of the systems. So my role was producer, just to more sort of manage the scheduling and resource management of the company on the project. But on the side, just kind of doing some design tasks, technical implementation of design principles. So now that we've released and we're adapting it to DLC structure and we're looking into what's next. I actually moved into the technical design role like about 2 weeks ago officially. Okay. So it's actually pretty recent.
Okay. Yeah, that's why I was like, I thought you were the producer on it, and then you were like, oh, techno. I was like, okay. So yeah, now we have our answer there. That's why.
Yeah, it's a good fit for me. I love the work. Like, I love my job. I often have to stop myself from working, especially now that not having to go into the office and not having that division between work and life as clearly as before. So I definitely love it. I love working in the engine. I love just solving problems and being able to implement systems. So that's what I do now. And basically, it just means working with the other design team, members of the team, and art and engineering to, not only come up with designs for the systems we want to create or expand upon, but to implement them, find out what are the best avenues for implementing that thing.
Gotcha.
So
and
that's what I've been doing.
And considering you obviously helped with the foundation of all the systems and for just the base Mechwarrior 5, now you're sort of more filling in a role of going forward. Obviously, we've got more information on the DLC, but also the modding side, the infrastructure there. And that's where we're going to be talking about today. Can you take maybe a step back here and rethink? When we were introduced to Mech 5, one of the things that was touted was modability, right? That and obviously over the AMAs and stuff like that. And even when we were at MechCon, I know I talked about it with you a bit. Was there design decisions early on? And how does that work with Unreal? Obviously we're talking about a pretty big subject here, but was that a challenge? Was that a lot easier? Did you already have previous experience with that?
It was definitely a challenge. Early on in the project, it began as intent before it became implementation of how we wanted to approach modding. We knew we wanted to support it, and we knew that some of the systems we were building early on, we wanted those to be built, in a way that was a little more mod friendly than they would be if we weren't considering mod support, because the systems really do benefit from being designed in particular ways if you're going to support modding or not. I think it's fair to say, at least personally, it would. If I could go back, I probably would have planned for the implementation side of things a little earlier, and transitioned out of intent into implementation a little sooner. So there's definitely very different considerations. Like, the work is very different when developing something to consider modularity and modability. Now, the discovery phase for mod support in the engine was not simple, as we found as we continued to investigate the implementation side of things. The engine is built in a way that modding is possible, and it's there for you to explore. But we've had to do quite a bit of work to actually get it to where it is currently. So, we released the first version of the editor at the start of the year. And we did that before we had implemented, the custom packaging system to make everybody's lives easier. And much of that was myself wanting to get the tools into everybody's hands as soon as possible.
Yeah.
Knowing we'd be updating it and improving it and fixing some of these gaps along the way over time. Because the sooner people can get into it and get a sense of how the systems are built and how the editor works, once things really started to get smoother, they'd be in a better position to start pumping out content.
Gotcha.
Rather than us, waiting 3 or 4 months later and then putting out the tools as maybe they are today.
Yeah. Well, that's a little bit of
the ground.
A little bit of a double-edged sword, if you will, because you released the tools. They weren't they're still not complete, and they may never be complete as far as what you want as well. But some of the community members dove in. I'm looking at you, Naveed, if you're out there. And they ran into some hurdles right off the bat, and obviously they were sort of hindered by that. But at least what you're saying is you release that with the intent of just so people understand what's going on under the hood. And one thing we know, and I know about modders, is they have a lot of time on their hands and they have passion. So sometimes they'll, I don't know what to call that. Go down the rabbit's hole quicker than maybe you thought. Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, it was going to be impossible for us, for almost any company, to have a complete test plan with modability. you can approach it from so many different angles and try to do so many different things that the original design didn't account for, or the implementation on the engineering side didn't account for. So seeing people start poking at these systems and finding, oh, hey, I literally can't modify this one file, or the system doesn't allow me to do this, or there's a very obvious mechanic I want to modify in maybe the mech components that isn't exposed. Arguably we could have caught some of those things before, but it's going to be a back and forth, like as you've seen with the mod community so far. Identifying what they're trying to do, the roadblocks that they're finding, and then trying to just tear those roadblocks down. So it's hard to say what complete would look like. We can iterate on these tools until the end of time.
Yeah.
But my goal has basically just been to make sure that all the systems, all the mods that people are trying to implement, whether it's HUD modifications or campaign modding or anything, just making it as easy for them as possible, exposing what they need, and it's has been an ongoing process and will probably continue to be an ongoing process.
Gotcha. And just to clarify, we keep using, I guess, jargon. Maybe someone out there doesn't understand, like systems or having access or opening up. Can you just give maybe just a quick example of what that means? Like when someone says, well, I didn't have access to this, or we're going to open up this system, are we just talking about a file, or are we talking about images? Are we talking about a 3D model? What is that? If you can, off the top of your head, think of an example.
Yeah, I mean, I think mechs are probably a good example of this, not just on the model and art side, but the code side and design side of things. So for anyone who's not familiar, Unreal Engine has a visual scripting system that they call Blueprints, which is kind of like a node-based visual scripting approach that allows you to do quite a lot and iterate very quickly and prototype very quickly. But the other side of things, obviously, is code, is source code, I believe it's C++, C# for Unreal. And so the engine is amazing in that sense because it allows you to iterate and prototype very quickly, especially on the design side with blueprints. You don't need to have any kind of bottleneck with engineering or having somebody else to do the implementation for you. When you formulate the idea, you can prototype it very quickly in blueprints. So the issue with that is that blueprint logic, especially for very complex systems, is not as efficient resource-wise as code. So what will often happen is a designer will build or prototype a system in blueprints. They'll prove it out, on paper, and the system works, and we want to move forward with this or tweak it this way. Often what will happen there is that they will then work with engineering to port most, or if not all of that logic into actual code. So once you get something into code, exposing it to modding becomes a explicit thing, not an implicit thing. When you're building a system on the code side of things, generally best practice isn't to just go through and expose literally every variable, every code function for, say, use in blueprints. Most of the time, because that stuff isn't necessary. As a designer, they'll need access to maybe half or a third of the underlying functions in blueprints, and the rest can just reside in code and run in code, and nobody else has to worry about it from there. So what we found with our release is that there were cases where systems were built in a very component-based approach, where on the mech side of things, for things like movement component, for example. So rather than all of this logic all just existing in one class, like the Mech class, the Mech class is comprised of different component classes. So it has a component class that handles movement logic, and a component class that handles, its view systems for first person or third person. And so you can go into those individual components and modify some of that logic without having to touch the main parent class, which is the Mech in this case. So what we found with the mod side of things is just finding these points that were implemented in code that were not exposed because, for one reason or another, they just weren't needed during development. Now with modding, people want to start poking at these systems and doing things, thinking outside the box, and put a nice twist on the existing mechanics. And oftentimes to do that, they need those functions exposed. So that's where we go, and we explicitly expose those functions.
Okay.
It's not really just a matter of exposing the whole underlying system. It's just not very efficient from a development perspective.
Gotcha. And I guess maybe this is an ignorant question. Why, even though you said you may not need it, is there any reason not to release source code? Is that like an industry thing, or is that just more of a protecting your product thing? Is there any, I guess, reason not to do it?
Yeah, I mean, it's very complex. I won't be able to speak too much on it, just in terms of like a practical knowledge or experience with it. But I mean, there's so many different considerations. You're talking about not just IP and ownership and things like that, but you're also talking just about security. Not necessarily our own security, but the security of the users. Like exposing source code and allowing mod systems to inject code in an application is not something to be taken lightly. Giving somebody the ability to write code, package it into a mod, quote, for a game, and then releasing that mod and saying, hey, download this mod. It allows you to do such and such, and just run this code I wrote. There's always going to be a chance that not all of that code is doing what it should be.
Gotcha.
It's malicious code can be pushed through those systems. So that's part of it as well. But like it really is 100 different.
Gotcha.
100 different considerations with things like that. I think, I don't know, from my experience, it's rare for games to release source code, especially early on. I think in most cases you might see it when the project is very long in the tooth.
10, 20 years. Yeah.
So it's not a common thing.
All right. So obviously you've had modding on the brain for a little bit. I've talked about it back in MechCon and stuff like that. Did you have a vision or an idea of what modding was going to mean to Mech 5, and do you see it being a big part of the game? And what is, I guess, your stance and PGI stance on Mech 5? Is that as important as the DLC content and so forth?
Yeah, I mean, personally, and from a company perspective, it's important to all of us. Like it's important to me because, so I started with a company with Mechwarrior Online in support. So from the beginning of my involvement with PGI and Mechwarrior, it's really been the community's perspective and input has often been the forefront of my roles. So over the years, I've been with the company about 5 years now, seeing that passion, but and that's the opinionated passion, which is a good thing. To see that over the years, and it was inevitable, and I knew and I anticipated most of the things people would be into when we started talking about modding for Mech 5. It's been great to see the start of that, seeing people be able to actually put that into effect and finally be able to say, like, this is the vision I have for Mechwarrior and how these mechanics should work and how I want them to work. And giving people the ability to actually follow through on that is really cool. So it's important for us this year. It's important for us. It's, when we talk about things like DLC and release schedules and release plans, the other side of that is important. It's important for us to maintain the interest and functionality of the mod systems, because for a lot of people, modding is a huge feature for a game, especially with a game like Mechwarrior, which can be as complex as you want it to be. as complex as you can imagine. There's so many different iterations of the different mechanics in MechWarrior, and so many different opinions about how those mechanics should work that I think we get a lot of benefit. The game gets a lot of benefit, and the players get a lot of benefit from being able to, put these things into action. So it's definitely important for us, and I think you can see that with the updates. The update cycle that we've had for the mod editor since its release. Closing up some of those holes and providing functionality for some of the things people are trying to do has been important. Will continue to be important. So yeah, it's a big deal for us. We want to keep this train going.
Gotcha. And obviously DLC and dates, we covered that in a previous video. It's obviously going to be delayed until at least the back half of the year. As far as updates for like editor, I guess we can just go ahead and knock that question out, which is I've seen talks in the Discord, and this is the official Mechwarrior 5 Discord, which by the way, anyone can join, and there's multiple modding channels where you have access to developers like Alex to ask questions and so forth. So if you haven't, I'll have a link for the official Discord down below in the description. Let's talk about that just for a second. I've seen you mention another patch. Is that something that you have sort of a set date on for the editor, or is that just sort of a game, or is it just an editor patch? And can you talk about it?
So the one I've mentioned in the mod chats of the last little while, it's an editor-focused update. It does have a small game component, but it's really focused just on editor functionality.
Okay.
I don't have a public date. I've got an internal date that I'm trying to get us to hit.
Okay.
It's soon. I would have liked to have gotten the update out, 2 weeks ago. But we just have some stuff to juggle that just kind of necessitated us moving some resources around. So it's ready to go. It's just needs some final testing, mostly on my end, just to prove out some of the things, make sure that the stuff that we're unlocking for people to do is actually still functional. So hoping to have a date for it soon.
Okay.
It should have some good stuff in it. I don't have an exact list, but offhand, we've had some issues with widgets, front end like UI, UX systems.
Okay.
Modability there. So a big fix for that, which is going to be a huge relief for some people, Naveed in particular. I know has been waiting for this. It's going to make things like HUD mods and front end mods a lot easier to make. There's some frustrating roadblocks on the technical side that people are working around, so it'd be good to get this out, and they can just, my goal always is to make things as easy as possible, because the more roadblocks you have, the more frustration you introduce. It can be so easy to just sap the interest in wanting to follow through on something. So it'll be that. There's a couple other, some fixes, in terms of like weapon data assets not appearing in instant action and stuff like that, little bits and pieces. But it'll have some improvements as well.
So that's been a theme I've noticed, which is Unreal, and I think we need to talk about that, which is to get into Mechwarrior 5 modding, you need to learn Unreal, right? Like obviously it's part of it is the editor, and I feel like sometimes that's also a roadblock in itself, right? Because instead of you just looking at like BattleTech by the HPS, that some of the modders, it's JSON files, right? Notepad++. I mean, obviously, some of them are going into Unity and learning how and assembling mechs and stuff like that and vehicles, right? They're having to learn that. But for Mech 5, you're having to learn Unreal. And I feel like that's sort of a stopgap for a lot of people, is it's a little bit more daunting, right? I mean, and I think that's sort of where I see where you're coming from. And I think on one of the AMAs you were saying is where like you'd want templates to be a part of your editor. Like when you load it up, oh, I want to make a new weapon. Okay, well, what kind of weapon is that? Oh, it's laser. Well, here's a template or something like that. So someone could get in there very easily. But the reality of it is there's a lot to fall upon a creator, and you guys have got like some basic documentation that you've let out on PDF and stuff. Can we just sort of talk about that? Like, obviously, you can't change that as far as you know, the need to learn stuff. And I think, that also falls on part of being a modder too, right? Like, you have to take responsibility and say, hey, if I really want to do this, you almost have to not become a master at it, but you definitely have to at least understand how the systems work. What has that been like for you? I mean, looking at the mod scene as well as, hey, now you have to learn a basically, top of the line, 3D engine and the editor out there. That's got to be a little bit daunting, I guess, and to tackle that, right?
Yeah, I mean that's super daunting. I think it's one of those things that's, as a developer, it's easy to take it for granted. In terms of, we'll just, we release the editor, the Unreal Engine editor, and to us and to me, that was the best option, the best thing, the obvious choice, because because of how powerful that is. Now, realizing, of course, how complex that is, and like you said, just how much you need to learn if you're gonna, make an interesting mod. I think there are a lot of different approaches to how you handle mod tools, and you could argue that, well, maybe we should have just released a dedicated tool set that allows you to do very specific things. But I think the problem with that is that not only would that have taken considerably longer for us to get out, it would have been more restrictive.
Yeah.
It may have been a little easier to use and a little easier, to make a day one thing.
Yeah.
But we would have had to be building bespoke systems to make very specific things, whereas releasing the editor, basically just, you can make anything that obviously is like blueprint and content and data focused, not code focused. So yeah, it definitely increases the learning curve, but I think that like the sheer potential makes that worth it. That's my personal opinion. And if you look at other Unreal games that support mods, like if you look at something like Conan Exiles or Ark, there's a few others out there. If you actually look at their mod tools, every implementation's been different. There's not just one approach. Every project has done it a different way. You can look at Robo Recall, one of Epic's projects. They used a template approach. So you launch that editor and it says, would you like to make a weapon? Would you like to make et cetera, et cetera? And I think it's a valid approach, but I think for us personally, we wanted, I think, if I were to ask myself, as somebody who, had worked in Unreal prior to this project and for whom game development is also a hobby, not just a job, if I were to ask myself what mod approach I would want, it would be just give me the editor. Give me the editor, and I'll understand that there are going to be some things that won't have code side or whatever it may be, but I would much prefer a system that it's not proprietary. I can look at any YouTube tutorial on Unreal Editor, and all that information is going to be applicable to the editor that I'm using to make my mod, which I think is really valuable. So yeah, I mean that's the approach we took. It's not the approach we had to take, but I think it was the right choice. It definitely is daunting, and I feel for anybody who sees that we've got the mod editor up. They download it, they check it out. They free up 70 gigs of space on their hard drive and compile 100,000 shaders, and then they're like, oh man, it's actually not quite as easy as I'd hoped to just do something as simple as like make a weapon. But I think what's important to me is that the tool is there, the potential is there, and like you said, we have the documentation, but it's quite basic. Here's how you get the editor going. Here's how a test map and make a weapon asset. But the scope of the game, there's so many different systems. There's so many things and mechanics and assets.
Yeah,
the guide is going to be something that will you know.
But like a part of me says, does that fall on the developers? Like I could understand I mean, the reality of it is, you guys are a small team in the grand scheme of things. I mean, okay, maybe not the smallest of developers, right? I mean, I don't know how many current staff, but it's one of those where maybe just maybe that falls on the community too to say, hey, yeah, you could take all that, like, let's just say, for example, let's just say you're the knowledge base for the mod scene, right? So you would be responsible for, well, that would take up X amount of your time to have to document this or that, blah, blah, blah. That almost, to me, it almost seems like community members could step up. And that's, I can't say it. I'm not going to commit myself to that, but that's also one thing of why I'm trying to keep an eye on what's going on in the mod scene, highlighting what mods are going on, but also the documentation part. That's where I feel like a wiki would be huge or something like that. I mean, we have Discord, but the problem with Discord is it's like a organic forum and stuff gets lost, right? You can pin it, but I mean, so I almost feel like a wiki, and then if people make videos, they can embed those YouTube videos and stuff like that. I just feel like that's probably another thing where the community members can sort of take that mantle and it takes the load off. I mean, again, I can see people arguing saying, well, that's the developer's responsibility, and I get that. But also too is like, in this case for me, if that would require you to say, well, that's going to take up X amount of my time per, week. And that's also taking me away from the mod, tools and implementation and all that. Yeah, to me, at least that would make sense. Right. But, sort of like, we do have mods out there and there's some really cool mods and we'll talk about that, but why try reinvent the wheel? And it's one of those where, just in the modding section earlier, there was someone talking about UI, and they were like, "Oh, I'm brand new. I have no experience. This is all a little bit over my head, but you have other modders right there that have done full UI mods already. And so if that was documented in some way, and then be like, oh, so that's how you do it, and then boom, instead of them spending X amount of hours of time, does that make sense? Like,
yeah, I think I feel an obligation to document and assist with some of the systems that are unique to our game. Things like mech pipelines, or things that we've done and made and added that aren't just a part of the engine. I feel an obligation there, and so that is kind of what the guide has been focused on up till now. It talks about, it's like, here's how you make the weapon data asset, which is a thing that we made, and that's how we implement our weaponry. And here's how you spawn a mech, because our spawning system is unique to our game. So I think there's an obligation on our side to help people understand how these systems were implemented and how to accomplish the things that they want to do. The other side of that is just the engine, learning the engine. Like you mentioned, the interface systems, UMG is what it's called for Unreal. That's not a system we built. So there's so much documentation out there that already exists. It would be, I think, unnecessary for us to document how that system works, because it's going to be like, that's a huge system. I mean,
yeah, it's already there.
It's the same interface system that every Unreal Engine game is using. So you can go to all the documentation and communities, development communities, and YouTube. There's some amazing YouTube playlists on learning Unreal Engine. Like, I use them all the time.
Yeah.
Not even just for my own projects, but just for Unreal systems for our game, that I need to understand a little bit more about how this thing works. Let me just look at what else is out there documentation-wise. So I think systems like that use what's available. There's years of work, years of experience just out there. Thousands and thousands of hours of people's time understanding these systems, and like, bless them all, they put the time into making 50 video playlists on here's how to learn UMG. Yeah. It's so amazing that it's out there. So I think it's half and half.
Yeah. I get that. I guess I was more like looking at like, well, this is how you get a mech, because technically, from everybody I've talked to, there's nothing stopping anybody from getting a mech in, but yet we haven't seen one done yet. And one of the hindrances,
I think it's just very complicated.
It is, right?
It's super complicated, and that's one of those things that's like, we have, like, when I refer to something like a pipeline, like, that's referring to our start to finish approach for the creation and implementation of a mech. There's every department is involved in that. every department, art, engineering, design, all have their roles. Multiple people go into making just one mech. So, it's complicated. And, that's something that I would like to outline a little more clearly for people in terms of what that pipeline looks like. And, here is the suggested flow for doing this.
Gotcha. And is that stuff that could be streamlined a bit? Like, do you guys do that internally already? Like, if you have a mech that's, and again, I'm speaking out of here, that's, animations could be potentially shared, or does that have to be specific to that mech? Or, I mean, stuff like that. Is that behind the scenes and how mechs are all put together? Is that a template that could be made at least, or at least hey, this at least gets you to this point 25% instead of, starting at 0?
I'm not sure, to be honest. I do know there are tools that help us along the way in terms of generating some of the data that goes into making a mech, loadout systems and all the stats and all the various component-based systems. Like mechs are complex. Mechs are not just a matter of making a humanoid, first-person shooter character. They're an order of magnitude more complex.
Yeah.
So I do think there are some systems on our end, but for the most part, it really is just a workflow thing. And my understanding of how the system, how our pipeline goes, it's, each mech mechs share skeletons, I believe. But animations are bespoke.
Yes.
Okay. So we've got the modeling work, the rigging work, the animations, and it's a significant process. The question of streamlining is a tricky one.
Or at least maybe not streamlined, but definitely, is that something that would fall upon you guys document? Like, hey, here's our process from naming conventions and 3ds Max to or Maya. I don't know which program, but like this is how we're importing the mesh, and this is what it needs to be done. Like same thing with like vehicles and stuff like that. I mean, is that something that would fall upon you guys, or is that something that the community would need to do or create as well?
It would be. I would like us. I would like for us to be able to provide some more guidance there. I think some people out there in the mod community have already done some of that work in terms of they've started that process and they have an understanding of how to bring a mech into the game. But I think that falls onto a side of things where it's not as simple as just, hey, let me look up a tutorial on how I can bring a character into Unreal. It's because mechs are what they are. There's some very specific stuff and custom stuff that goes into them. So, I think I'd like for us to do a little bit better job on assisting people with that. Something I can try and work toward.
I mean, obviously, that's the first thing in pop. I mean, Mechwarrior mechs, right? That's the first thing that pops out. But like, I think a lot of people would be surprised of not even realizing like that's available right now. Someone could make a mech. That's not because I've had a few people hop in like chat, like hey, are there any new mechs? I'm like, there could be. I think from me and my perspective is, I think it would, and I think I remember Russ sort of saying this, maybe it was you, it was someone on the AMAs that were saying is, I wouldn't be surprised if people do it, but probably not to the fidelity that we're doing it. Obviously, you guys have different damage states for the 3D models, you have different textures and stuff like that, and you guys cleared it up to where people could grab whatever's in MWO and bring that over. And so like I have actually been a little bit surprised that no one's done like a Timberwolf or whatever. But then the other part of me after talking about it with Navid a lot, which is animations, right? Which is a big thing because you need to make your own animations, and like hopping in there and you realize, one, that's a lot of animations, transition states and stuff like that. But it is a lot of work. But and I think that if that falls upon like one person, you almost need again, sort of like what you guys do. You have a pipeline, you have a team that does it. It's not just one person, right? So, but yeah, I think people would be surprised like that ability is there right now. It's just no one's done it, right?
Yeah, and I think you can see that in other areas in the editor as well. Like things really fall into two camps. Like one area is technical limitations, where the editor isn't supporting this at the moment. Like I literally can't do this thing I'm trying to do because of a technical reason. The other half is information. I don't know how to do this thing I'm trying to do. I want to get a mech into the game, and technically I might be able to, but I don't have the information to get me there. So I believe, on a technical side, the mech pipeline is there to be used, and you can get a mech in the game, you can run it, you can fight it, you can play it. It's just one of those things that's, the gap is in knowledge, is in information. And it's worth repeating, mechs. This is not a simple game. No game is simple. No game is simple. That the fact that any game gets made is not to be taken lightly, especially with smaller teams. The fact that there are some games out there that a handful, like 1 or 2 or 3 people make, is incredible. And our team is not large. We have a mid-sized team in terms of the industry.
Gotcha. Now,
Assassin's Creed can pull 15 studios from across the world to put their game together, and that's why their games are so massive. And that alone is a colossal task to organize that. We've been doing this as a company for, I don't know exactly how long, close to a decade, working with mechs and refining our pipeline for this. So it's a complex system that, even with documentation and guidance, will still have some obstacles for people to grapple with.
Yeah, part of me wants to dive in, but to a tangent, or side, but it wouldn't be more towards modding. So we'll hold off on that. But speaking of mods, we've had a variety out here. Got a few questions for you. One, are you surprised by what we currently have out there for mods? Especially which ones maybe are popular. And then, do you have any favorites, and do you use any of those?
I'm not surprised. No, I'm very pleased. The ones that have seemed to be very popular, like the HUD mods and MechLab mods, I think those were expected, very much expected, and hoped that those would be looked at. In terms of use, not persistently. I test a lot of mods. I check out a lot of mods. So I'll run it for a bit. I'll check it out, see how it plays, see how it goes, and then I'll usually fall back to standard because I with my job, it's good not have to worry about is this mod affecting this system I'm trying to design or fix. And I don't play in my personal life as much as I used to during active development, just for health reasons, mental health.
Yeah, that makes sense, right? If you're working and then you're living it, it's I can understand that.
Yeah, but very pleased. I actually am a little surprised that nobody has gone too deeply into mission creation just yet.
Is there any roadblocks, do you think, why that is?
Not to my understanding, no. The system that we use for building a mission is there for you in the editor. That, I think, falls into that second camp of information gap. We just haven't explained how to make a mission.
Yeah.
So, I guess it shouldn't be too surprising to me that people haven't gotten it done yet. But
and are you when you say mission, are you talking about like the quests? That sort of, is that what you're referencing, or?
Well, actually, that as well. I mean,
that's a pretty cool system. I mean, it's very similar to like what HPS did with flashpoints, right?
Yes. Yeah. So the campaign, the quest system that you see in the campaign is also there as well. So when you are in the front end and you're in your home screen, you get that transmission pop up with little spiel from the contract giver and the rewards and whatnot. You accept that, you go to the thing, you do it, you get the contract, you resolve the transmission. All that can also be modded. People can make their own quests right now. From my understanding, there should be no technical block there. But also just on the other side of things, like the actual missions, the actual levels you're going into, the missions themselves should also be moddable. You can make what we call internally an authored mission, which is like all our story missions,
Gotcha.
where we've laid out the tiles specifically how we want them to be, and we've put in all the mission components the way we want it to be.
Gotcha.
You can do that, or you can do it's not really procedural, but we call it procedural just because it's easy to. the procedural missions,
Mm-hmm.
which are not basically anything that's not hand authored. We basically give the generator, we say to the generator, well, this is the biome, this is the enemy, this is the difficulty, this is the size, and a couple other variables, and then it just generates a level based on those conditions. I believe that is also moddable as well.
And that would utilize the game modes that you currently have. Whereas what you're saying, missions would be like your campaign mission, where it's like, go here, do this objective, go here, kill this person, go here. I see what you mean.
Yeah, and I mean, our objective system, like, mission types really are just a focused mission component. So missions are comprised of various components. So, there's a capture component or an assassinate component. And we build missions from those components. So when you do an objective that says destroy this building, I believe that's like a destruction objective component.
Okay.
So in authored missions, I think we mix and match those. And generally just for, for lack of a better term, I don't know if this makes much sense, but individual variety, making sure that when you do an assassination mission, it feels like an assassination mission because that's mostly what you're doing. If every mission was just a mix and match of all the different components, like destroy this building, assassinate that guy, capture this, there wouldn't really be any mission types. Yeah. So, when you make an authored mission, you basically just flow out those mission components and mission triggers. It's especially if you don't know how it works, it's not an easy system to understand. So I do feel that there's a burden on our side to explain those systems a little better.
Yeah. Speaking of documentation.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah. That's a good example. Yeah.
I mean,
but the system's there. So.
Okay. Yeah. I figured it was. That's something, again, I feel like as an individual that probably might be really daunting, but like I could definitely see where stuff like that would be really cool. I mean, and in these you can have scripted events too, like audio pop up, right? And like, for instance, if you do maybe it's like, hey, assassinate that, merc leader or whatever, you could technically have it so where it triggers and they're like, hey, they're after the commander, he needs to get out of here. Let's, guard him and blah, blah, blahs. And you could set up those events, right? I mean, it's really the sky's the limit on imagination pretty much here, right? And also understanding how to do it in the editor.
Yeah, and time and
perseverance. Right, yeah. Yeah. All right, so that's cool. Like, now this may tie a little bit into if it does into DLC or just PGI's plans with Mech 5. Do you take inspiration from the mods? Has any popped in, or is it you're like, no? And then are any of those ideas ever implemented into the future of Mech 5?
Not just yet. Like a lot of the, things like career mode is a good example of that. I think relatively early on, somebody had started working on a more open-ended, non-story driven career mode system. So that was something that we had planned for, that we had intended to do. Likewise, things like stuff that we shipped with, but we had with anything. There's 100 different designs for any system you see in a game. It's rare that the system you see in the final game is the system that was originally designed. So I think something like HUDs are a good example of that. We obviously knew that there would be interest in different HUDs and HUD mods and approaching the HUD differently from like an aesthetic and philosophical perspective about what a mech HUD should be. So we haven't taken direct inspiration just yet from anything that's out there. A lot of the stuff that people are looking at are the things that, we expected them to, because given the opportunity, we were going to be looking at those again anyway. On the HUD side, I can tell you that the number of conversations I was in about HUD approach and HUD design and implementation, lost track. It was probably one of the most discussed things throughout the game's development. So it's not surprising to see more than one HUD mod out there that are all viable. And some people like this one or like this one. Nothing specific.
Okay. I mean, as far as regards to the I've talked long and hard about this, and the default HUD for Mech 5, I was disappointed with. I mean, and I was very I guess vocal about it, because like I felt it was like, well, I mean, Mechmar Online has a better HUD than this. Like, why wouldn't you just carry that over? And I remember specifically saying, like, there's got to be a reason. There's got to be a reason, guys. And I remember, and we got it. We got it directly from Russ. Now, you may not have agreed with the reason, but at least we have the reason. And he was saying that internally, it was believed that this was to be the better HUD, but specifically it was so first and third person would work. And of course, community members like Navid and stuff have stepped up and said, well, you could have still done that really cool HUD and also changed and altered, the third person as well. So I'm sure it wasn't a universal thing. I mean, I think that's just generally no team is going to be like 100%. They'd be like, hey, like, I think the community would really like this. But I guess from my point is the community members can create whatever they want. I actually feel like this is, in particular, HUD is actually something that is such a deep conversation, because everybody has an opinion. I have an opinion of what the HUD should be or could be. And I actually, to be honest, even though Navid's HUD is awesome, I use it all the time. And for those that are wondering, it's the 3D HUD. I still don't think it's really encapsulated. I don't think anybody has really, even MWO, even Mech4, all of them haven't encapsulated what like we read about in the novels, being in this mech, this futuristic, high-tech, machine of death. What does that mean when you're in it? And that's where like I always just sort of challenge modders out there. Like, think of the experience. What does it mean to be in the mech, right? Like, what is this, and are we taking it forward, in that process? But not to get off on a tangent, but it's one of those where like I can definitely see the critiques from both sides, but I feel like regardless of what you guys would have done, there would have been people, like, even if you guys went with the 2015 or whatever trailer it was, there were people that don't really like that HUD mod. They would rather just a Mechwarrior, 3 style, that don't want anything like what Navid did, right? So again, you have mods out there that gives the freedom to be able to create your interpretation of what battle mechs and Mechwarrior, should look like, right?
Yeah, I mean, like you can see through our development cycle, right? That initial reveal trailer had a very different HUD from what we shipped with, and there's I don't recall names very quickly, but there's another modder out there who's trying to implement something similar to the what I guess I'd call our second mod approach,
yes.
or not mod approach, HUD approach,
yes.
that was seen in some of the marketing materials beyond 2016. I don't know if you guys remember it with like the green framework and all that kind of stuff. I mean, so you can see it's very clearly on display how we had our own development path when it came to how we approached the HUD. And like I could talk for hours about HUD and what the process was there and where we ended up. But really, there was a number of reasons why we have the HUD that we do. Some of it technical. We obviously experimented and tried world space, more like 3D style HUDs. There were some visual distortions that we weren't quite happy with that brought with it. So, I think aesthetically, I like a lot of what's coming out. Functionally, not as much. So when I joined the project shortly, pretty much around the same time that we had that MechCon where we first revealed Mech 5, which was actually really cool. One of my favorite memories from working on this game is that launch or that announcement. Very emotional, actually, at the time. I personally, so the approach where you lay the weapons out on either side, on the main view area of the screen, on the left and right on the top.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, functionally, personally, not a fan of that. I find it a little confusing, a little needlessly confusing. And to me, it would not have been a good approach for a release. To me, it's a good example of something that is prime for modding because it is quite specific in its approach and what it's trying to do. And if you want that aesthetic, if you want that functional layout, you can do it.
Yeah.
But
No,
if
I think that makes sense.
if I sat down a new player and said, okay, have at it, I think the learning curve there is quite a bit larger.
Yeah.
Than a more condensed like weapon group panel.
No, I agree.
Approach. So,
and I agree even more now that I've used it. One of the issues I do have with the 3D HUD is that not only the weapons where I get you, but actually the change of where the enemy paper doll is down on the bottom right is actually more often than not, it's different because I'm so used to it being up on the top right and it's right there. But now I'm having to, it's not the same transfer of knowledge from like MWO, and I'm not used to it. And even though I've played a lot with the 3D HUD, that's actually something that I don't like. But he has two, to be fair, Navid has two different ones. He has the enhanced and the 3D, but I've actually thought about, going and just playing with the enhanced one, which is just more of just a graphical update to the base one. But yeah, I definitely understand, right? Where there would be issues. And then just the weapons themselves, where they're at and stuff like that. You have to look to the right and left to get information, whereas all you have to do is just go and look in one location. I definitely understand that.
Yeah, I mean, so much of it, I think, this is one of the more subjective parts of the game, I think. And then, there's another one out there that it's like a very fighter jet style approach. And the name, I can't recall the name of the author.
It's a Mechwarrior 3 inspired.
But like aesthetically, I find that really, really cool. And so I love that there are all these different approaches. And so I'll take this opportunity to say that, the HUD is something we are also looking at the moment.
Is that something that, as a company, you release a product, is that something where you'd be like, hey, we're just not happy with that, and hey, this new update has, it's obviously that would be a free thing. Okay, boom, here's a new HUD. You can maybe switch between, or is that something, if I just took your comment, that your future possible development there?
Yeah, I mean, nothing's off the table in terms of us reevaluating how we handled something, or whether or not we want to revive a previous approach or rethink our approach. I mean, that's a cool benefit of modern games. The release structure and the update framework allows you to iterate and improve on things. So, I personally look at every system in that light. How could we have approached this differently? How would we approach it again? Gotcha. So I think, pretty much nothing's off the table there, but
okay.
HUD included.
And it's funny because, again, we can talk in length about HUD, but I feel like UI is one of those things where you want as much information, but as little clutter on the screen to, block, especially with your game's going on. And it is so subjective. You do want people that want that Mechwarrior 3 or like that fighter pilot, heads up display look with the green, lines and reticles and stuff, and altimeter, you know what I'm saying? Like all this information. Then you have others that want something more sci-fi looking. And then, so yeah, it's definitely one of those very subjective topics. And like I said, for me on a personal level, I also look at just other games that I play. I made reference a few times to like Titanfall, how they did their UI and the experience, like when you get in the Titan, it closes up and then you have this thing come alive in front of you. And I've always just sort of felt that with Mechwarrior in particular, and I think it was just more of a limitation, especially back then, is that experience. Like, what does it mean to be a Mechwarrior? And you're getting in this, again, this machine that's very sophisticated and stuff, right? It's not just this, simple robot that you're getting into. But anyways.
Yeah, I'd agree there.
Yeah.
Experience is such a big part of it. And that Titanfall approach is really cool.
Yeah.
One thing that comes up a lot is like, part of development, especially visual development, is reference. looking at reference art and examples and iterating through it. One thing that is you can never reiterate enough is that every engine is different. So it's easy to get a piece of reference from like a movie or another game and be like, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we did this? And it's like, sure, but that was made in a completely different engine that had a completely different approach to how it rendered HUD elements. So that's another layer of things. It's things can vary very much between different games, different engines, and what is and isn't possible, or what is and isn't easy to do.
Gotcha.
Because, like my opinion, my going approach to development is that almost anything is possible. Almost anything has a solution. It's just a question of how long that solution is going to take.
Gotcha. Yeah, resources, right? Time.
And how many people it's going to take.
Yeah.
So the HUD I was thinking of, because I want to call it out, Techie HUD by Coffee Giraffe, I think is a really interesting approach. I actually played with that one quite a bit. So yeah, I just wanted to call that one.
Yeah, and by the way, where you can find all these mods that we're talking about is on Nexus website, and I guess that's another question for you, which I guess we'll go ahead and dive into, which is when obviously the switch from Steam launch to Epic Game Store was a big deal in a lot of people's eyes, but from the modding scene, it changed things for you. I mean, Steam Workshop, a lot of us are, at least me, familiar. I'm familiar with Steam Workshop as far as like City Skylines and stuff, right? So like, it'd be the case like, oh, you want that new mech or vehicle, you'd subscribe to it, and then you'd go into your game, you'd go to the mods and check it, and boom, it's in your game, right? And that changed. Epic Game Store doesn't have a system like that, at least not yet. I think it's still on their framework. So all this is over on Nexus, but I think from what I understood from like some of the BattleTech modders, is Nexus is actually having that freedom is actually somewhat better, even though maybe it's not as accessible, because if you don't know to go to the website and you have to, create an account, it's not just built into the game, right? But they're not constrained by like file size or like all of that. So can you talk a little bit about that, from the design perspective, or is it just because you guys just implemented your own mod loader, if you will, and there are mods that are starting to utilize that. What is, not to, again, because I'm asking a lot of questions, let's just go ahead, the change, I guess, from Steam to Epic, maybe a little bit of a history lesson there for people behind the scenes.
Workshop support obviously is a huge deal when it comes to modding. And we will be supporting Workshop day one, release on Steam. We are still planning on the Steam release this December. So we'll be supporting Workshop and supporting the integration to make that like, the process everybody would expect with Workshop integration. We still have to provide the editor through Epic. So modders who own the Steam version will just need to, pop over to EGS and get the mod editor through there. So this is a good opportunity as well to mention that we are going to be the first product in Epic's mod portal. So they've got their, if anybody follows the Epic Games Trello roadmaps or their store roadmap, they've got the mod support system integration into their launcher up on their roadmap. So if you go there now, you can actually see a little sneak image of their interface, and it actually has a screenshot of our game. So we haven't blasted it out there just yet. So the Epic launcher very shortly will support a workshop-style mod.
Interesting.
Acquisition and installation service.
Okay.
So Mech 5 will be launching with that. I don't have an exact date just yet, but it's coming fairly soon. So we'll be integrating that in. it'll be a lot easier to find and install and manage the mods. So from a user perspective, obviously, the exposure is a lot better. It'll be integrated not just into the launcher from which they're actually launching the game, but we're going to be trying to do some in-game stuff to point people toward where they can get mods. So hopefully we can surface some of the cooler mods that are available out there.
Wow, I have so many questions. Keep going.
Yeah, and somebody actually mentioned this the other day in the mod channel. It's like, man, I wish there was a way that people could just automatically update their mods, because obviously you throw it up on something like Nexus, you're relying on people then manually downloading, keeping that thing up to date. So with the Epic integration, and obviously with the eventual workshop integration in December, the auto update process will be obviously there. So you release your mod on EGS and eventually in workshop, that when you push that update, everybody who's got it installed is gonna get that update.
Okay.
So that should be coming soon.
Wow, you just dropped. I had no idea about this, and you just totally knowledge bombed me. All right. So questions though. First thing, what about conflicting mods? Because that's one thing I've talked about to Naveed about, which is if he's working, like for instance, someone's working on a mech lab, right? And that's another topic maybe for another day. But modding wise, he's working on I think Magnum is working on his own version of MechLab. Well, Naveed's also get his version, but because his rescale mod is touching, I guess, files and stuff like that with Magnums, it doesn't, you can't do both of them at the same time. So Naveed's doing his own thing, but his will include all of his work as well. Is that something that this system solves, or is this still like, hey, you can only have one of these checked, or at a time?
Yeah, they're unrelated systems. Like the compatibility issue is a matter of like asset management and asset registry. So that's like actually a good good topic for another question.
Okay.
Is that question of compatibility and cross compatibility with mods? Unrelated system. Unfortunately, okay. I'd love to be able to say that. Oh yeah, just this next update is just going to solve all asset conflicts. Would be amazing.
Well, can we go and roll into that other question then?
Sure. Yeah. So compatibility. That's a tough one.
Yeah.
So because it's a question of the assets themselves. Now there are ways to build things that make this easier. So I mentioned earlier in terms of the concept of components. When you're building a complex system, building it in a modular system, so that as an example, say you're building something that manages market prices for a game. Now you can put all that logic into just one market manager system. The drawback to that is that, say if somebody just wants to modify, the value of items in conflict zones, and that's what they want their mod to be. With just this one master system, they'd have to go into that master and modify just that logic. Now, if somebody else has a mod that they want to modify, the value of rare items across the whole system, those mods aren't going to work because you're just modifying one asset. Unreal does not support blueprint merging. Like it simply does not support the ability to have two copies of the same blueprint with different logic, and then to merge those things so that the differing logic like harmonizes into the one blueprint. It simply doesn't support that. So that's not going to be something that we're just going to be able to resolve. It's out of our realm. So we can help that along. So there are some systems that were designed in a way that they help to mitigate some of these problems. Some systems not. So in cases like the Mech Lab or metagame stuff, things that touch rarity tables or player progression concepts, or like the timeline of the inner sphere. Some of those systems are monolithic a little bit in the sense that there's really just one thing that controls so much of that logic. So yeah, arguably we could and arguably should go back into some of those and find those stress points and modularize those systems a little bit better. That being said, in some cases it may be impossible for us to do so. There may be, I don't know what an example would be, but there may be a case where you've got two modders who want to implement two different approaches to one system, and there's just not going to be any way for us or them to resolve that conflict so that both systems can work together. So that's something that I've been tracking, obviously seeing a lot of the back and forth between everybody in terms of, hey, I'm modifying this and it kind of doesn't play well with your mod that does this. I think there's an obligation on our side to look at how we can remove those stress points. But that will have to be kind of a case-by-case situation.
Okay.
And unfortunately, it's not something we can turn around quickly, because in some cases, these are very foundational systems. So we need to be very mindful of how we modify and update those systems to work a little bit better with these kind of disparate mods.
Well, this is sort of where teams form too. From mods, whereas like that's one of the things I've talked about, which is, getting people on board to help. Like if you've got someone that's doing a rescale mod, but then you're also someone else is working on a mech lab, and you like what they're just combine share resources. So you're basically working on the same thing, and then that way you don't have to worry about conflicts and stuff like that. That's sort of where I see. And then obviously if someone has this overarching goal of like, hey, I want to create this and so forth, and you like that, you just join and you work with that person, and then all your stuff is good to go. You mentioned Steam. Obviously, I think word is out there, right? You guys had a 1-year exclusivity with EGS. Will a Steam workshop and EGS workshop, is there compatibility issues there? How is that going to work? Is that anything to worry about?
Well, I mean, it's unlike, so it's this may change because we still obviously need to do the work and see how it pans out. But I believe that there's not going to be compatibility between the two portals. So if you acquire the game through EGS, at least for now, I believe, you would not be able to tie that into a workshop system and then get your mods from there. That may change. I just don't want to commit to that because I believe out of the box it would not work.
Okay.
So we might have to investigate if it's possible.
Gotcha. Wow, that's pretty dang cool. I mean, what advice, I guess, would you have for people out there for the compatibility? Like, is there anything they should do, or is there any steps they could take to sort of mitigate some of that?
Yeah, I think it depends. It depends greatly on what they're modding. As you said, cooperation is a great benefit to this and communication, but that's not always going to be practical. That can be a big ask in some cases. In other ways, if what they're trying to mod supports this approach, try to think from a modular perspective. To accomplish what you're trying to accomplish, does it have to be done in the way you first thought? So if you want to add a new mechanic, do you need to modify that one master blueprint, or can it be done in another form? Now, that's going to be very touch and go. That outright may not be feasible in some cases. In other cases, it might be. So specific advice is tricky. I mean, it really comes down to learning the Unreal Engine approach to how blueprints communicate with each other, and how you might be able to use things like interfaces or event dispatchers between different blueprints to kind of bridge a gap and maybe build a more modular system. But that
Gotcha.
again can also be a big ask. So I do think that this should be an ongoing conversation between us, the developers, and the mod community to help to kind of identify some of these stress points, like I mentioned earlier, and just how can we alleviate some of that?
Gotcha. No, I did. I guess another question would be: is there a concern with conflicts with like future DLC and you guys updating maybe systems behind the scenes? Is there any concern that you have there to that may mess up people's current mods? Is that something we're a little bit past, and that's not really a big problem? Is that something that's crossed your mind?
Yeah, I mean it's an ongoing concern all the time. Every time we issue even the smallest update, I'm going to be biting my nails about that. It's tricky because it's inevitable, honestly, that updates are going to conflict with mods. That is just unfortunately the nature of the game, nature of development. Logic will change, and if logic changes in a file that's been modded, then you've got a conflict. And any of those conflicts are very difficult, if not impossible, to just automatically resolve, elegantly resolve. The mod generally is going to have to pull that update down in the editor and either fix some node or logic issues or adapt existing logic to support the new framework. I'm going to continue. I think we've done pretty well at making sure people are aware that an update is coming.
Yeah. Back up your shit.
Yeah, oh my god. I'll take this opportunity to say, anybody who is not using source control, please use source control.
Yeah.
I cannot stress how important and valuable it is. Even if you are one person or if you are building a mod team, it is so valuable.
Yeah. Get a repo set up. Do it.
Yeah, look into Perforce, look into any of the half dozen systems that are available. It's easy to do, especially if you're one person or a small team. A lot of these licenses are quite open at that scale. It's really just a matter of finding the source control software that looks good to you, getting some additional storage, and setting it up. It will save
a lot of tears.
A lot of tears. You might go gray a little later than you would have if you didn't have source control. So yeah, but in terms of the update stuff, yeah, like we need to continue being communicative about when the updates are coming, and if there's anything anybody needs to look for, because it's going to be hard for me to guarantee safe updates.
Gotcha.
That unfortunately, I mean, if somebody can point me to another game that has mod support that does not have this problem,
I think it's.
Let me know, because I'd love to see what they do. But I think they are few and far between, if existing at all.
Yeah, I think obviously if you just have a good amount of heads up, I think everybody should know, and if they don't know, they'll learn. Unfortunately, sometimes you have to go through it to. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Well, and just to finish that thought, actually, like we are being cognizant of this when we are talking internally about updates. We make sure to be mindful of the fact. Okay, it's like, just so everybody knows, when we update this may have this effect. So we're being mindful of when we update, what we update, and how frequently. We want to minimize this kind of destructive consequence. So, it's in the front of our minds when we talk about releasing updates. We try to be mindful of it. So
yeah. You mentioned, I know we're getting on here. You mentioned you were surprised people hadn't done any missions or quests or anything like that. I guess, is there anything else that you're surprised no one's done, or that maybe you wish someone would do? Like something like, haha, yeah, finally someone's taking this on.
I think maybe new campaign arcs. So people should be able to make a new campaign. And when I say new campaign, like, if somebody I mean, I don't know how compelling it was for people. Obviously, execution can always be better. Nobody is more critical of work, especially my own work, than I am. But the holotable events that happen throughout the main campaign of Mech 5, with those holographic elements and the story development, exposition, the dialogue occurs, all those dialogue chains and all the logic that controls the flow of a campaign in terms of mission completion and progression of those story missions, that can all be modded. So you have access to the dialogue tree system that is used to actually implement those hangar dialogue exchanges.
Yeah.
So you could do that as well. And I think some people are working on some bespoke campaign stuff. But that's personally what I'm kind of excited about is a new story.
Yeah. You can be a critic, I'm sure, but don't. Your fans out there can be pretty critical as well, including myself.
No.
Yeah. So
no, it's good though. I like it.
Yeah. So obviously that hasn't been done. Characters and like I suspect all of that is the case, is just people not having the information, time, of course, and resources. And I assume, sort of like how there's a lot of correlations. You probably already know this, between like HBS's BattleTech, and obviously it didn't have mod tools like support, but they didn't really hinder anything and they helped behind the scenes. And what you guys have done, and of course your base game is very similar as far as your mercenary, here's the inner sphere, here's contracts. Hey, they have flashpoints, you have quests, go. Like, there's a lot of similarities, and I'm assuming that's not a coincidence. But from the mod scene, I figure as the game gets near its year mark, I mean, again, 6 months from now, we'll see mods that we didn't have right now, right? So, and as that, I guess, workshop integration and stuff, and you guys update, we're just going to see more and more. But yeah, we haven't seen any teams, I would say, really form. Not that I'm aware of, as far as like, multiple people teams. I may be unaware there. There may be a few, but nothing as far as tackling like, hey, we're doing a campaign and story, and here's new artwork, and here's new character, blah, blah, blah. Because as far as I know, like, even like Rihanna and Fahad, like, those models could be replaced. Those 3D models could be replaced. The voice acting and all that. I mean, technically, someone could rewrite the original story too if they wanted. As far as I'm understood, right? So,
yeah, it should be possible. I mean, really, most of these things are really just a question of time and implementation. You're just doing the work. But it's all there. Yeah, I do think there are some teams. I know before we released mod tools, there were a couple people trying to organize teams for very interesting concepts. Yeah. I think, if any, they've maybe broken into different discords. I'm only in the official one, so
I'm always hesitant when hearing big grandiose things like that. I guess it's just my experience over the years of just, I've become very speculative about like, oh, we're gonna do this grand story and we're gonna have all this stuff. It's like, whoa, slow your roll. That sounds cool, dude. You start small. Let's see what but I don't know. Maybe someone will just drop it on our, whatever. Another thing too is a lot of people were talking about, and I know as far as on the Discord, it gets shunned to bring up other titles, which again, I don't really understand, maybe from a legal precedence, but like, people were saying like, hey, it'd be really cool if someone redid a campaign where you played Mechwarrior 2 or 3 or the storyline of 4 and stuff like that. And there's nothing stopping, modders from doing that. It's a lot of work.
It is a lot of work, yeah. I think that's probably the case for any creative endeavor, but at least from experience, game development is very prone to that. Scope is an important part of proper planning of a game development project, and it's very easy for scope to grow and get out of control.
Yeah.
It
Feature creep.
happens. You can see
Right.
it with so many things. Yeah, like indie games, even full games. Like AAA studios. Like you can, especially if you work in the industry and you play games. Typically, most people do. Um, you can see that scope. You can see that scope increase and that feature creep, like you said. Um, so yeah, I mean, anyone looking out there looking to do a relatively big mod project, I recommend start with the building blocks and go from there. It can be easy to outpace. It can be easy for ambition to outpace practical implementation.
Yeah, most definitely. I can understand that. Well, I've had you here long enough. You've answered so many questions. Is there any information or any statement or is there anything you want to get off your chest that I didn't ask? Or I know we had questions. The problem with some of the questions that we had out there were very specific, and I feel like you would actually just be better to answer those yourself, like on Reddit. And if those people, I mean, it was like specific, like, hey, will you undo this? Will you open up this file? And, why not that? And I figured maybe we might cover some of that today. So I apologize. We didn't have as many as I thought we would as well. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like you said, quite a few were very specific, and I can probably just, I mean, I recognize half the names who posted in the Mechwarrior 5 subreddit topic you made for this
Yeah,
talk.
tracks, VTOLs, mechs, being able to like bring those. I think some of this, the question is this possibility if some of this is in your DLC, and obviously, NDAs, you can't talk about everything. But some of this gets very specific.
Yeah. So I can if you can also ping me directly, and I usually try to be pretty good about replying pretty quickly. So if we didn't cover anything on here, you can just jump onto the official Discord and just send me a direct message or call me out in the modding general, and I can try and get back to you on the specific questions. It does look like we covered most of what the main questions were, beyond some of the very specific technical ones, which I can just address individually that don't apply to most people probably listening to this. People want more documentation, which I think we went over, and I agree. So I'm going to try and get some traction there, get some work on that. Maybe timed with future editor updates, so it may not be a super quick turnaround. There is one thing that I would like to touch on, and so that's one of those things where people say, "Well, should I bother working on this mod because I don't know if you guys are going to do it?"
Yes, and that's actually pretty important.
It is, totally, and at least the knowledge of it, because somebody can still make an informed choice to continue with what they're going to do, because it's going to be near impossible for what our vision is and what we release to be identical to somebody else's vision. So I think it's important that we say, yes, we're working on career mode, and we're going to be adding some new functionality to like the Mech and MechLab systems. Our announcement post for the DLC update mentions being able to like a blueprint system for quirking mechs.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's important to call things out like that. I will say on the MechLab front that it is unlikely that we are going to be overhauling our MechLab. So if you were looking to do a MechLab mod with your vision of what a MechLab should be, it is unlikely that our paths will cross. We're obviously going to be working on it and expanding it, but it's unlikely to be an overhaul.
Yeah.
In other areas, so one of the modders that I speak to relatively often, who seems to have a good eye on a lot of the systems, asked about infantry. And have we considered it? Are we working on it? Which suggests to me that they've thought about doing it in a mod. We are currently looking at infantry systems quite seriously at the moment. It's my main project right I would recommend not looking at infantry for modding. It's extremely complicated, and it is very easy to do it poorly. Performance. And I try to remind all the modders I talk to as often as I can without being annoying about it. Be mindful of performance cost. It's easy to change a value and test on your one machine or maybe two machines. Once it goes out to the world, you're talking about hundreds of machines and hundreds of configurations, and somebody running Windows 8, or 8.1 if you're lucky, with a 6-year-old CPU and a 1-year-old GPU. Like, there's so many different configurations.
Yeah.
So be mindful of things like performance. Now, infantry, I bring that up in the context of infantry because characters are not cheap. And building an infantry system that performs well, while also having enough complexity to be cool, is a tough nut to crack. But we are in the process of cracking it, so I recommend not looking at that.
Good. Okay.
That is as much as I can say.
No. Is there any other systems like that, or does that pretty much round that out?
Well, I feel confident talking about that one because I'm working on it.
Okay.
But in terms of other stuff, not really. Like, we've announced we're working on an open-ended career mode. Now, somebody asked this earlier today. In fact, how is modding going to work with the DLC? What's it going to mean for modding when this DLC comes out? How is that going to work? So we're still exploring through that. Obviously, we want these systems to be moddable. Obviously, how that's going to work and what that will look like, I don't yet know. Sorry, I actually lost my train of thought about
how modding as far as the systems go for we were talking about infantry and then for DLC.
Right.
Here.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. New features, new systems.
Yeah.
So I mean, when we talk about something like career mode and us doing career mode, that should be a moddable system. So, if you're thinking about doing a career mode, it may be good to, simply mod the career mode that we release and
just wait.
Yeah, and if you've got a system that you had in mind, and then we either have more information out publicly about what a career mode is, or you release it, and you're like, oh, they didn't do that really cool idea I had. Well, then do it. Like take our career mode and expand on it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So yeah, there's not too much new stuff I can really go into aside from what we've announced.
Yeah.
Before, I did want to call it infantry because I know a lot of people have asked for it and talked about it. But that's one thing we're currently looking at.
Yeah, obviously with the DLC announcement, I'm really intrigued. I was going to reach out to Russ and maybe see about more information about, obviously the equipment coming out, how that's going to work and stuff, quirks, but that's not obviously in topic here, so let's not worry about that. Yeah, man, I'm excited. Obviously, I've got my own personal things too with our Mechwarrior 5 Commander mod.
Right, how's that coming? You have to
a little slow.
Some information on this.
Yeah, so in my opinion, one of the best BattleTech games I've ever played is MechCommander. I love the MechCommander 1, MechCommander 2, not so much. It's an interesting thing, right? Because it's a real-time strategy, whereas like BattleTech by HBS is a turn-based strategy, right? So for those that want to know the difference, it's like going from, Command and Conquer, if you will, to versus like XCOM. It's two different genres, right? So, I think we would like to possibly bring on a few more. Our main engineer, you actually see him a lot, Wyrot in Discord and stuff like that. Very smart, very knowledgeable, but with COVID and he's got a family and his time and stuff, and that always what it boils down. But yeah, so before the last update, we actually had, selection moving around the camera and stuff like that. And I think from what he's told me is we should be able to get to that point. The big since that update. But the big difference is UI, right? Having to change that UI because everything changes. And one of the ideas that we had, which we still want to play test 2 ideas, which is the classic MechCommander, where it's always point and click, RNGs take the wheel sort of thing. And then the second idea is go towards more of a where you actually pilot in the isometric view. So it'd be sort of like a Diablo arcade sort of shooter with MechCommander elements. There's something to be said, I think, about a game like that that would be just absolutely fun. And maybe you could actually flip between the 2 mechs or issue commands. And then there's something about that top down. And Battletech is really unique, and Mechwarrior is really unique, where I think it really shines when you can add in unique abilities that don't necessarily make sense in Mechwarrior. Like, for instance, like just RNG mechanics for a Mechwarrior first-person shooter isn't as not believable, but sometimes it could be frustrating. So anyways, that's what we're working on. If anybody has Unreal experience, like actual experience, if you love MechCommander as much as I do and want to see that come to fruition, of course, join our Discord and reach out to me directly, and we can sit down and talk. But yeah, I don't, nothing has been of a surprise, I think, from my understanding. I'm more of the guy that's just sort of waving the wand, if you will, and writing things down, and these guys have been tackling it. So our initial goal, phase-wise, would just be to play Mech 5 in that perspective. That, you know, like, that's all it would be. There wouldn't be any added, right? So scope, just like get the camera, obviously some maybe simple UI, I mean, very simple, and then go from there. But we have to play test that and then also the other idea. So it doesn't seem so crazy. And if anything, like I said, I think, I mean, I'm actually surprised you guys, or, you know, and then if HBS is going to do their own thing, I just feel like if you aren't going to do it, and I don't see another studio approaching you guys to do a MechCommander, this is a great way to do it because it's already utilizing the game, which means more sales for you guys anyways, which is good. But the want and need for a MechCommander game, I don't know if you guys realize this, is huge. Like, one of the top...
I want it.
Right?
Make it. Finish this one so I can play it.
You know, we'll talk. So yeah, I feel like that's something that a lot of people out there would probably you know, get Mech 5, like if they haven't bought Mech 5 for whatever reason, may just get it just for that alone. But yeah, it's pretty cool, and the system would play really well with already, again, like, I feel like it just, you know, some depth and substance, right? I would refer to what you guys have created as like a good scaffolding, right? And you can just start building off of that, right? And I think that's a fair statement. And you know, I always see you in the Discord talking and stuff like that. So again, for those that are out there listening, he and others as well are in there. Obviously, don't ping him at like odd hours unless you see him there, because he probably won't answer, but he will answer whenever he can. But yeah, so I mean, do you have any? I mean, to me, MechCommander, there's just, like I said, there's just something unique about, I feel like, playing the game at that perspective. And it's not third person, by the way, for those that are wondering. I'm talking about like arcade shooter. You'd have to change weapons and their behavior and stuff like that, because you're not dealing with unlimited, you know, visibility. Do you have, you know, what about fog of war? Is that play into, you know, can you do, there's some really cool mechanics that are in some of the Battletech games, right? The mods right now that I feel like could definitely be explored. But one of the things that I look at is like having that experience. What is the experience of being that Mechwarrior or MechCommander in this discussion? So that's where I'm looking forward to seeing where modders come from, especially Mech 5. You know, I've talked a lot about this. Why I'm so intrigued by like Navid's Mech Lab or Magnum's Mech Lab, because, you know, like, it's something that we have in MWO. I think it would add value to Mech 5. And then on top of that, what does it do for some of the mechs, you know? And then, but what about other than just, to me, that's like superficial stuff. I'm saying like, what does it mean to be out on the, battlefield? What about the ability to pop chafe, and that messes up all sensors and obviously visual, because that's really important for Mechwarrior, which is a visual element. It'd be weird to having like a fog of war in a first person shooter. It just feels weird, right? But if you can have elements like pop chaff, but maybe some mechs have the ability, or all mechs have the ability, if you invest in equipment or utility slots or something where you have thermals and you can see through them. So that means you can still engage, or those type of things where you can dynamically change the battlefield. To me, I'm intrigued by those, or other things. You mentioned infantry. I thought infantry would be great from the start, right? Like that, I was playing XCOM 2, and the first thing that popped in my head is, especially at the rescale, to where it makes mechs feel a little bit more connected with the environment around them. And I don't know if you want to key in on that, but infantry now, right? Going into the buildings and XCOM and stuff, and I just imagine mechs. I'm such a nerd. That's all I think about is BattleTech and Mechwarrior when I play these other games. But infantry shooting SRMs or lasers or machine gun at you, and it just brings that BattleTech universe a little bit closer to what we read in the novels.
Yeah, I think anything that any feature or any mod that changes or expands upon things like the strategic context of the gameplay, I think is really compelling. I think that's what's so compelling about the MechCommander approach to things, is that just that simple viewpoint change and what it suggests mechanically changes the strategic context of the game so much that it really adds a new layer to it. So I think that's really cool. And hopefully, so it's still in R&D, but I think if it pans out, the infantry stuff should be pretty awesome.
God, that'd be great in MechCommander as well. Like, oh, okay. Anyways, I'm getting, yeah. So we'll let you guys know more, and I'll reach out to you if we have any questions in regards to that. But thank you again for being on here. Thank you for taking part of your Saturday away from work. That's what you should be doing. But you were in Discord earlier. I saw you. You need to take that time for yourself. Be safe out there in the world. It's crazy right now. So if someone wants to find you, obviously Discord, Twitter, is that as well?
Yeah, I'm on there. I don't really post much, but you should be able to find me. I don't recall what my name is.
Okay, we can provide that down below in the description of the video. But yeah, thank you again, man. This was a pleasure, and we definitely have to do this again. And look forward to hearing more, of course, about the mod editor, but also I'm sure we'll hear more about the DLC in the future. So
yeah, thank you for having me on, and just for everybody else. So I'll try and get a date out for you for the mod editor soon. It's a short-term thing, so it should be coming pretty soon. And I just want to thank everybody who's working on mods, interested in mods, engaging in the discussions, challenging us with, why doesn't this work, or how do I do this? You guys add so much value to the game and what the community is and can be. So I really appreciate it. We all appreciate it here. So keep it coming.
All right, guys. That is it for Alex. Just want to say thank you again, Alex. We will touch base another day, sir. Have a great weekend, and thank you again, man.
You too. Thank you.
All right, guys. That is this podcast. And of course, this podcast is supported by listeners and viewers like you. If you guys would like to help support the podcast, consider becoming one of my patrons. I'll have a link down below, but really all it boils down to is this whole thing. NGNG is supported by you guys. So the podcast, my Twitch streams, YouTube content, if you enjoy those things, consider becoming one of my patrons. And of course, I just want to say thank you again to all of my followers on Twitch. If you haven't caught us live, make sure to do so over on twitch.tv/NGNGTV. If you'd like to become a sub there, awesome. We have emotes, stuff like that. And of course, we do have a new merch store, NoGutsNoGalaxyStore.com. It ships in the continental US, Also, internationally, if you live in Europe, it prints and ships over in Europe as well. So that's quite nice. I believe someone in Germany said shipping for a coffee mug was like $3.99, which isn't bad, all things considering. If you're going to be doing any shopping on Amazon, I do have an affiliate link where I earn commissions basically when you guys buy stuff. I'll have that link down below. So whether you're upgrading your mouse, maybe your mic, your headset, your keyboard, maybe you upgrade into a new Ryzen or Intel CPU, whatever you're doing, if you want to use that and support me here, I would appreciate it. Just want to say thank you again. This was your local No Guts, No Galaxy Mechwarrior podcast signing off for today. My name's Phil. Until next time, Mech Warriors.